Two favorite conspiracy theorists, and tonight we were going to talk to you guys about the Elisa Lam and Aleister Crowley and the Cecil Hotel conspiracy. So do you know anything about those? Have you heard anything about that?
So all I know about Aleister Crowley is that he was an occult figure, and the Elisa Lam thing was pretty spooky. It's quite a story about where she ended up, how she died, and then there's some backstory as far as to where it happened. But Aleister Crowley, I'm really curious to see what you got on him.
Okay, well, let's start with him. So a little bit of background on Aleister Crowley is he was an aspiring magician back in the 1800s, the late 1800s, and he was living in the Cecil Hotel in London in 1898, and he was introduced to George Cecil, who was a member of the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn, and that was an occultist, I guess you could call it a religion, but it was formed by the Freemasons. There was a hierarchy, and you had to be initiated into it.
Oh, really?
There were 3 different orders, and the first order taught esoteric philosophy, so tarot, astrology, divination, and geomancy. The second order taught magic, so like scrying, astral projection, astral travel, and alchemy. And then the third order taught spirit communication. And basically it was just a secret society devoted to the practice of the occult, metaphysics, paranormal activity. And it was prevalent during the 19th and the 20th century. So they were active in Great Britain, and they really focused on like spiritual development, and it sort of was the footprint for present day Wicca. And though it was, inspired by that, so I guess one of the books that he was introduced to was called The Book of Sacred Magic, the Abra Merlin, and the Discipline of Practical Magic. And then I guess in November of 1898, he was initiated into the Order of the Golden Dawn. And I guess by their leader, his name was Samuel Little McGregor Mathers. So, and then Aleister Crowley went on to write a bunch of different books, and he sort of is the godfather of I guess you could call it present day Satanism.
Okay, so that's where it gets its roots.
Right. Yep. And let's see. But a little bit about the Cecil Hotel in London, where he was staying. Well, there's two things. First of all, the Cecil is where Elisa Lam was found in Los Angeles.
Right.
But I guess well, I didn't know this, but there is like this, secret doppelganger hotel that was first built in, it was built in 1890 in London, and it was torn down in 1930, and it was owned by the Cecil family. And the Cecil family owned the property that the hotel was built on. So they'd owned it probably up until around the 17th century.
Do the two hotels have ties to each other?
Yeah. And the family owned they had a mansion on that piece of land back in the day. And I guess, let's see, the owner of the property, his name was Cecil, the Earl of Salisbury. And I guess they were pretty formidable. They were supposedly supposed to be the power behind the Queen of England and the throne of England. So they were given it by the overlords of the British Empire. And when the hotel was built, it was known for its stone block and red brick exterior. And there was a Masonic temple, I guess, down below. And it was a meeting place, I guess, for a lot of the Freemasons when they would stay there. And it's said that in these meetings and in this area, they were practicing devil worship.
So you say the Masons have ties to the early occult crews, which eventually gave birth to Satanism?
Right. Correct. Yeah. And where Aleister Crowley first became introduced into the entire world of Luciferianism and the occult and magical occult practices. It was through that. So,
and Crowley was mixed up in all of this.
Yes, and I think he took it to the next level. I think he took it more mainstream, basically, is what I'm saying.
Made it more popular?
Yeah. And let's see. So, if you cut back to the Cecil in Los Angeles, it has a pretty dark past, and it's hosted a variety of. There's been a lot of deaths there as well, and then there's some pretty famous people have stayed there. Like I guess the Black Dahlia was said to have stayed there as well. It
says there's at least 16 deaths that happened there.
There's lots of
non-natural causes, right?
Lots of suicides. Richard Ramirez stayed there, the Night Stalker, for a time. And it's also located on Skid Row. So it's sort of a seedy area. So, yeah, there's been a lot. There's a ton of suicides that have occurred. People jumping out of the windows, people, overdosing, hanging themselves, just whatever.
There's just some crazy stuff going on there.
Yeah. So that's.
So don't go there.
Well, Nowadays, they've revamped it, and they've tried to move away from the history of it. So they're trying to clean it up so that people will, come back and stay there some more. So yeah, that's their dark history, and it gets a little bit more. Well, it gets a little.
Some of that's been going on since the 30s on into the 50s when they had their most of their stuff going on. But there's even some in 75, 92. But the most recent one you had mentioned, Elisa Lam, was in 2013.
Right.
Not too long ago.
Yep. So a little bit about Elisa Lam. She was 21, and she was born in Canada. And she was out here. She had graduated college from the University of British Columbia. And she wanted to take a solo trip to LA by herself. And, she's 21, and her parents were a little bit nervous about her coming. I guess she suffered from bipolar and depression. Mm-hmm. And, she was on medication for it, so she was handling it. But she just wanted to take this little trip by herself before she had finished college. She wanted to take a break and then come back and, look for a job and start her life and her career and things like that. So she was going to do this for herself. She arrives in LA on January 26th. She took the Amtrak, and she was coming from San Diego, stopped in LA, and then was heading to Santa Cruz. That was her next destination, but obviously she didn't make it that far. And I read something that the hotel had said that she initially had booked. They did like a hostel type environment. You could either get a private room or you could stay with other guests in like a communal room. And there were complaints of her having odd behavior. So they asked her if she would mind going into a private room by herself, and so she did. So her behavior was already starting to be a little bit off when she checked in. And the last report of someone seeing her was at a bookstore. And the bookstore was called The Last Bookstore, which a lot of people find extremely odd, right? Because it's her last.
The last one she went to, yeah.
And she was obviously planning on going home because she had bought books and some music to take back with her. So it wasn't like she was going to be committing suicide because, obviously if you're going to be doing that, you're not going to buy gifts to bring back to your family when you arrive home. So that doesn't fall in line.
It's not the normal behavior of someone wanting to off themselves.
Right. So
she had plans.
Mm-hmm. And so her parents were nervous, but they made an agreement that she would check in with them every day. And on the 31st, they never heard from her. Of January, they never heard from her. So they ended up calling the police. The police took a look around, didn't find anything. She was due to check out that day. And it wasn't until February 19th that they found her body naked and floating in a water tank. And the hotel had gotten some complaints about low water pressure, and that the water that was coming out of the faucet tasted really gross. Like it was dark and it had a foul odor, and it just didn't sit right. So that's when they went to go check the water tanks, and I guess it takes a lot of effort to even get into the water tanks to check them.
Right.
Because I guess the lid's really heavy and whatever, and that's when they found her body. And so it's sort of like a mystery, one, how she even got in it, and what was she doing in there in the first place.
So it's weird crazy that they would have to find her by the water going bad, but more than that, all the access to these water tanks was blocked off and locked.
Right.
The tanks themselves were like 4 foot by 8 foot. They're like way not easy to get to, even if you could get access to the roof. Each one of those had concrete blocks over the lids, preventing people from getting into there or anything happening to them.
Right.
So a girl of her stature, she was pretty small, right? She wasn't very.
Yeah, she was like 5'4".
Yeah, so just her going through all that just to get in there would be virtually impossible, and then close everything up behind her.
Right, because
she couldn't have locked all the doors.
Right, how are you going to get that lid back up and over herself?
That's crazy.
And to even get her body out, they had to drain the water tank and cut a hole in it to get her out.
God, that's crazy.
But
she had been started to decompose inside the tank.
That's correct, yes. Right. And the police came across some video of her acting bizarrely, which if you Google it, you can watch the video and for yourself and see what she's doing. The thing about the video, to me, not only is she sort of like stepping in and out, pushing all the buttons, it's like she's talking to someone. She's, it's almost like someone's outside of the elevator, but it also sort of looked like she's looking around to see if anyone's coming into the elevator. But I thought the most bizarre thing is that her clothes don't fit her. She's got on like these oversized basketball shorts and an oversized sweatshirt. Obviously, none of that belongs to her. So whose clothes is she wearing?
Where'd she been? Who's she hanging out with?
Right.
How is she having these discussions? Or it looks like she's interacting with somebody or something in the elevator.
Right.
It's really bizarre. So if you look at the video, and it was viral for quite some time. It's just she looks like she's off her rocker.
Right.
But yeah, her behavior is really weird, and the fact that the next day or something like that.
Later that day, I think she
ended up in the tanks, but they didn't find her for a while, right?
Yeah, they didn't find her until February 19th, and she had been missing since. Well, I mean, the last known interaction was a few days before January 31st, but she'd only been in LA since the 26th. And she went missing she was reported missing on the 31st, but wasn't found until February 19th. And just one more thing, her toxicology report came in, and she did have some medication for her bipolar and depression, but no alcohol and no illegal drugs were found in her system. However, they're wondering if she, maybe had mixed her meds up somehow, so that made her act a little bit strange. But I also read that if you're treating antidepressants, or if you're taking antidepressants to treat bipolar, sometimes if you're not absolutely 100% correct on your dosage, it can induce manic behavior, which is what it looked like she was doing.
So maybe she had some bad meds or a cocktail of meds that weren't sitting right.
Right. That's one theory.
Possible, but that doesn't explain all the things that took to get into that water tank.
That's correct.
You could be a psycho wandering around the hotel. Someone's gonna get you help, but that doesn't get you from an elevator to inside of a water tank.
Right.
So that's the interesting part.
Yep. So let's circle it back and let's talk about Crowley again.
So Crowley, you're saying, has roots with the Cecil Hotel?
Mm-hmm. And there's a couple of weird tie-ins with Elisa Lam and Aleister Crowley. Now, I understand he's far, far in the past to her future and what's going to happen, but
because he was early 1900s, right? That's when he was running around.
Yep. And when he was staying in the Cecil in London, he wrote a poem. And it was called The Poem of Jephthah. And if you look at it, some people say it was the foreshadowing of Elisa Lam's death. And the story or the poem is about a judge, and he sacrifices his only daughter, and her name was Celia. And that is an anagram for Elisa, who died 115 years later in the same hotel, but across the pond. The other weird thing is that Aleister Crowley was big on aliens, and he was said to have made contact with an alien named Lam.
So I hear things about Aleister Crowley and the UFOs, right?
Yes.
Where essentially there's these UFO astronauts that traverse the universe, and he has contact with these individuals.
Right, and one of them was named Lam, like Elisa Lam. So here's my theory. All right, so the way he contacted this alien was through performing a ritual. And the ritual was conducted in 1918. The way you do it is through sex magic. And you have to have intent to invoke certain intelligences into, bear with me, physical manifestations. And that would come to his partner. So whoever he was practicing his sex magic with, the alien would come and speak to him through his partner with visions and communications. Now, supposedly, when you're doing this ritual, you open a portal, okay, for that entity to come through. Now, Aleister Crowley is well versed in all of this, so he's able to close the portal, okay? But he eventually comes out to Los Angeles and starts mixing around with different socialites and things like that, and they start reading his books, and he starts talking to them about his interactions with this alien and this portal, and he meets up with this man named Jack Parsons, who is good friends with Ron L. Hubbard. Together,
here it gets good.
Together, they form Scientology. Okay? So, Jack Parsons was supposedly the founder of Jet Propulsion Lab.
JPL.
And he took some of the things from Aleister Crowley's workings and decided that he and Ron L. Hubbard wanted to contact an alien of their own. So, what they did was, their workings were called the Babylon workings. So, same sort of thing, but they said it was a paradigm shift in human consciousness, is what this book and this rite was going to be about. So they decided to come together and try their own ceremonial sex magic. And they didn't do everything that Crowley had suggested, and they didn't follow all the teachings and all the practices. They sort of took bits and pieces, which really upset Crowley at the time, because he couldn't back what they were doing. So
it went a little rogue.
So the short version is that Parsons wanted to take the spirit of Babylon and a whore of Babylon and invest it into a human and create a child into the spiritual world, and then call the spirit down into the baby and direct it into the womb of whomever he was going to impregnate. And when that baby would be born, it would be the incarnate of Babylon. And on this ritual in this hotel room happened between January 4th and January 15th. Now, it's not known for certain if there was a child that was ever conceived through this period of time and during the ceremony, but we're not so sure if they were able to actually close any sort of portal that they could have opened, because Crowley couldn't oversee it, and they weren't using all the rites that had been laid out in front of them. They just, like you said, had taken bits and pieces and removed it. So it's said that this portal in Los Angeles could still be open.
At the Hotel Cecil.
Right.
So where bad things occur.
Correct.
So portals are a pretty, how do I say, they're all over the place. If you talk to certain people, like you'll find them Hotel Cecil, various native lands,
right,
Skinwalker Ranch, any number of places overseas, like Stonehenge for one. These are all certain portals, and I think some of that, we talked about Hellier before, we're talking about Aleister Crowley. They all kind of, I believe you're talking with, Dianetics, all that stuff.
Right.
I think all of that was like a foundation for things like Hollywood.
Right.
You have a lot of people that...
which we just talked about.
All of them kind of surround themselves with this type of culture, the occult.
Right.
And you see it in a lot of different areas. So it's pretty pervasive. There's a lot out there. It's way big. Scientology and all of that.
And they have a big foundation in UFOs and aliens. So
yeah, Scientology is based upon an alien, and that someone is going to come and pick them up, basically, in a UFO, essentially.
Right.
They don't talk about it. They refuse to talk about it, but that is at the core of the religion, is that there is another life force, another being, that they are doing all of this so they can raise their consciousness to, at some point, join.
Right. So what if they got their entire basis for their foundation of their religion from Aleister Crowley?
I mean, it all has to come from somewhere.
Right.
I mean, I would, that makes perfect sense to me. I mean, you have Aleister Crowley, Parsons, and if you go and take a look at Hellier, they talk about the last name Parsons pretty consistently. This day, every time something's going on, you're going to see this name Parsons.
Well,
they talk about Aleister Crowley, the UFOnaut.
Yep. And if you pay attention in the first, I think it's the first Hellier, or maybe it's the second one, she starts talking to an alien named Lam.
You're right. I think you're right.
I know.
Yes. When they were doing the spirit boxes.
Right. And the God helmet and all that.
The God helmet.
Mm-hmm.
So there's a lot of parallels.
There's
a lot of. So Lam is important.
Crowley's important.
Crowley, Scientology. It's amazing how everything kind of just balloons out from a few points. From a few select points, everything just kind of expands out.
Right.
Kind of like the universe.
The theories about what has happened with Elisa Lam. Well, there's at least 3. So let's see. The first one would be that. Okay, so let's talk about the movie Dark Water. Have you ever seen it? Heard of it?
I don't think so.
Okay. So it's a movie.
Dark Water?
Mm-hmm. I think it was a Japanese horror film. But then we made it over here, and it had Jennifer Connelly in it, and it was made in 2005. So the main character, she's a single mom, and her name is Dahlia, like the Black Dahlia. And she moves into a rundown apartment with her daughter, Cecilia, like the Cecil Hotel. And the building has all these weird supernatural events occur. But there's a point in the movie where she turns the faucet on, and it's this dark, disgusting, nasty water. It smells bad, it looks bad, it's horrible. Well, at the end of the movie, spoiler alert, they find the girl who's been sort of haunting the building. They find her dead body inside of their water tank. And there's a malfunctioning elevator scene in the movie as well. 2005.
So that was a good few years before that, because what was 2013 for her? And she went missing.
In a water tank, and a malfunctioning elevator, and dark water. Yeah. So there's that.
Wow.
There's some talk online about something called the elevator game, and it's about portals and traveling into another universe and another dimension. So basically what you do is you would, first of all, don't do this. But if you really want to know how to play it, you can look it up. But the short version is that you get into an elevator and you travel to a portal via a parallel universe or a parallel dimension. So you need an elevator that's at least 10 stories high, and you press a series of buttons and you follow these instructions that are given to you. And you now, after you've done all those things, you're now in an entirely different world. And when you reach the 5th floor, it said that a young woman is supposed to enter the elevator, but you can't look at her and you can't speak to her because she's not what she seems. And then if you get through all these things, then you'll get into a parallel dimension.
Oh, hell no.
So with Elisa Lam pushing all the different buttons, there was some theories that she was possibly playing the elevator game, and she got put into a parallel dimension portal.
And then manifested in the
apparently.
So Koji Suzuki is the writer of Dark Water.
Right.
She also did The Ring.
Uh-huh.
That's creepy.
Yeah.
That's one of the few movies that scared the living crap out of me.
The Ring did, yeah. Yeah.
So she has a bond with water of some sort.
Right.
And they say water is the
right.
lubricant to other world, I
right.
guess. That's also another thing that you'll find in the movie Constantine, where he has to submerge himself in the water to transfer over to hell or to visit these other alternate universes, I guess.
Okay. Like the bathtub scene in Poltergeist?
There's a lot of talk of water facilitating those types of things.
That's interesting.
You'll also find...
mirror, right? Because a mirror is supposed to do the same sort of thing, but the first mirrors are wet water.
Right. That there's also a significant amount of UFO encounters around bodies of water. Didn't we have a discussion about the missing 411 around bodies of water?
A little bit. We mentioned it. We touched on it, but we'll go deeper into that on another episode. But yeah, there's the Mothman watching the big devastating bridge collapse in a bottle.
So maybe the water in that tub had played a role somehow. Maybe. It's creepy.
And another strange theory, which you're gonna love.
Oh.
Well, actually, there's one more after this one. So this one I thought was interesting. They're saying that there was some government testing. Now, remember, the Cecil Hotel is smack dab in the middle of Skid Row. So they were having a population homeless Skid Row issue. And there's a theory that Elisa Lam was a guinea pig for a real trial that's called the Lam Elisa. Like, no joke, that's the name of the trial. And she was the guinea pig for this trial of TB. And I guess there was a huge tuberculosis outbreak that coincided with her stay on Skid Row and in LA at that time. And the common antibiotic for TB patients causes abnormal behavior and confusion.
Wow.
So they're saying that it's possible, or it's plausible, that she was somehow given TB, wandered around Los Angeles and Skid Row as patient zero, and spread the tuberculosis down to depopulize that area, and then was given some sort of antibiotic, but it had an adverse effect, and it caused her to have abnormal behavior and confusion. And if you do look it up, there is a test that was called the Lam Elisa, spelled exactly like her name. And it's not a normal spelling either. It's ELISA.
Well, it's a really long lipo or whatever enzyme linked immunosorbent assay. But this stuff is out there. Like, you can find this stuff really easily. I encourage people to go sniff around, because there's way too many similarities with all this stuff. It pops up, dark water, Elisa Lam tests. It's just, it's crazy.
Well, and then the last theory that I thought you would find the most interesting is she wrote a blog that was her thing. She had a blog. I'm not sure.
She had a Tumblr and a blog.
And in one of the blogs, she references a South Korean development by our government, invisibility cloaking device.
Oh, really?
Now, apparently, there is government offices not like within eyeshot of the Cecil Hotel.
Well, they're everywhere.
So, the theory is when she's looking outside of the elevator, you and I can't see who she's talking to because they're cloaked.
Oh.
And her frantic behavior is because she's trying to get away.
Knows that they're there.
And they're saying that it is possibly some sort of an assassination by the government because she knew about all of that, those secrets that they were in development of doing.
Soldiers of the Invisible Light Agency.
Right.
Talk about. So I mean that was a stretch, but it's out there. It's possible.
Yeah, I don't know.
That's nuts because there is. I mean, what, about a year or two ago they came out. They showed this new cloaking device that you could literally stand behind, and they couldn't see you, they couldn't discern you. It just scatters light rays all over the place. Man, that's a nuts.
Yeah, that's a wild one, right?
That would be crazy.
So either she was sacrificed in the forthcoming for this occult that Aleister Crowley was involved in and foretelling the future of her, or she was assassinated by the government, or she was given TB and given the antibiotic and died from bizarre behavior, or she went into a parallel universe and ended up in the water tank.
Well, some say that she's still alive too, right?
Yeah.
Because she had blogs that were updated after her death. That this could have been a false flag to get rid of the body.
Well, and the body, her body was already so badly decomposed that they couldn't do all of the coroner couldn't do all of the autopsy that needed to be done because she had already been in there for too long. The decomposition was too bad.
Well, I'll tell you what, that is definitely a crazy one.
Yeah.
No matter how you look at it, none of it makes sense. No matter how you look at it.
And
even
I mean, maybe, like we've said before, maybe the Cecil Hotel is an in-between. I don't know.
It could be, on the fringes of...
because what lures all of that darkness to that one spot?
It's a good point. So we'll have, the Black Dahlia, the Night Stalker, Crowley, the name itself, Cecil, all the things that surround it. I mean, there's been a significant amount of deaths that have occurred.
More than normal.
It seems unusual, yeah, and unusual deaths. Like everybody's jumping out of windows, So there are people that say that there are certain areas that just bring that kind of darkness. There's like dark forests in Japan and China. There's bridges, overlooks that draw this type of energy. So potentially this could be, what do they call it, vortex, where all this weird stuff happens. That's just insanity. I mean, I bet you if you walk into that building, you're going to.
Oh, for sure. They can remodel it as much as they want, call it a whole other thing. I think it's going under a different name now.
Well, it says here the last death was in 2015 of a man found outside the hotel.
Okay, yeah. So I mean, they can change the outside, but the inside's still the same.
Yeah, no, you can't get that vibe out of it.
So there's a lot of ties with this story, with a lot of the different stories we've talked about, and that we still have to talk about. This one is sort of like the center of all of the different arms. It feels like.
Well, when you dip into the occult and you realize that it's a subculture that permeates a lot of what we see and that we're unaware of. I think once we start going down that rabbit hole, we're going to start seeing a lot of weird stuff. And just to see the players that are connected to it, I mean, you can go from here and you can start talking about human trafficking, all that entails, all the big players that have been uncovered here recently. You know, Epstein, and all the people that he touched. That occult nature, behavior seems to be pretty popular with the elite, and you'll see it with the celebrities and all this other stuff. So I think you found something and you touched on something that is way bigger than we may be anticipating or expecting.
Right, and I was just looking at this Parsons Ronald Hubbard issue, and I guess on January 4th to January 15th, they went ahead and did this ceremony. We're not adept at closing the portal, so like I said, some think that it could still remain open, but a year and a half later, on June 24th, 1947, is when really the modern era of the UFO started.
Shortly thereafter, huh? And what were the first sightings in the 30s? Around there, and then you had the crashes in 47.
It started getting more prevalent then.
And then in the 50s and the 60s, you had massive flaps throughout the U.S. UFOs over Washington, D.C. And then they sort of faded off for a while. There's a lot of talk about that, how they dipped off, and then they came back looking different. That's when you start, in the 80s, you start to get the UFO, the triangles and all that stuff. And it's just, there's a lot there.
So I don't know if this is all
kind of mind-boggling.
How it all ties together, but we're going to keep talking about it and figure it out.
Well, yeah, I mean, you have the whole Native American vibe too. I mean, they've been seeing them, the Star people. They've been seeing them for many, many years. It's all quite interesting. There's a lot going on. There's a lot going on right now, and I don't think people are really paying attention because of all the stuff that we're dealing with otherwise. But there's a lot happening that we're not looking at.
That's right. That's true.
Man, it's crazy. But I think the occult thing is pretty big, and I don't think anybody really understands it. And if you dip your toe into it a little bit, you're going to see just how big of a subject it is. And I think that's why when we were watching Hellier, they were kind of hinting around at it. Didn't go super deep into it, but I didn't understand the gravity of it until I saw a few other things. And it all kind of put it into perspective for me. It's massive.
Yeah, we might have to do another review of Hellier again.
Yeah, maybe.
Through all these things.
I don't think when they were doing it, they understood how big it was, how many tentacles that this subject had. And they said like the more they looked, the bigger it grew, and it was overwhelming at points. But yeah, if you just pull yourself out and you look at all the different tentacles and where they go and how they interact with everything, it's fascinating.
Yeah.
I mean, because then you get into like your